This meeting is now being recorded.
Great. So this way, if you want to revisit the webinar at a later date or have other colleagues that you want to have go ahead and view it and listen to it, we'll have that option available. I'll send it out with instructions on how to access that in the Google Drive. So everyone should be seeing a tree or a nature scene right now. When the presentations begin, you should see those slides. If you experience any technical difficulties, please go ahead and send me or Cassie Brooks an email. You can also send us a chat through the chat function. If you'd like to send a chat, you go ahead and click the arrow next to the person's name that you want to reach. You should see an option to send a chat there. So again, you can reach out to either myself, I'm listed as CLPHA host, or to Cassie Brooks for assistance. I've gone ahead and muted everyone, so if you want to ask a question, and we hope that you do, please use the Q&A button. It's up at the top, sort of center right section of your screen. It looks like two chat bubbles, and it says Q&A below it. You can go ahead and click on those, and you can type your question at any time that you'd like. You can do it during the presentation, after the presentation, and we'll go ahead and save questions for the end. Cassie will be helping to facilitate that. But if you don't want to forget it, you can go ahead and do that. You also can list a question under the public chat section, which is on the left-hand corner. We'll see how much time we have questions for, but of course, if we don't have time, we will make sure to answer it via email to you, and if others have interest, to the rest of the group as well. So the conversation does not stop at the end of the webinar today. Just a reminder, this is actually the last webinar that we have scheduled in the series. So I will be working to create a survey to determine new topics for the year, and also to solicit some other feedback from you all for the working group going forward. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Cassie.
Great. Thanks, Abra. This is Cassie Brooks. I'm from the Chicago Housing Authority. I'm our education specialist, and I'm happy to be the facilitator for these education working group webinars. And we are looking forward to hearing both from an individual housing authority and from Attendance Works, who does a variety of practices to help reduce absenteeism. So we're first going to hear from Bernadette Stewart and the Marin Housing Authority. As Abra mentioned, feel free to include those questions in the public chat, and we'll be able to bring those around at the end of her presentation.
Hi, this is Bernadette Stewart, and right now we don't see we only have the leads with welcome to the global meeting. And Louis,
I'm pulling up your slides right now, so if you want to start with introduction.
Okay. Okay, my name is Bernadette Stewart. I'm with Marin Housing Authority, and the way that we're going to approach this presentation is a group format. So I'm here with our Commissioner Homer Hall, Michael Tabb with Community Connections, Dr. Shirley Thornton, who is a Vice Principal of Sausalito Marin City School District Bayside MLK, Principal Johnette Newton from Bayside MLK, and Marin Housing Authority Executive Director Louis Jordan.
Good morning, good afternoon, all, depending on where you are in the country.
Good afternoon. I've got everybody on mute so we can avoid background noise, but they should be able to hear you.
Okay.
So I don't know why we don't start full screen.
We'll figure it out.
So is there a way, are you going to toggle through the screen? Can you hear me?
Sure. I can either advance your slides for you, or you can use the arrows at the top. Would you like me to do it?
No, I can do it. Just give us 1 minute, please, because Louis Jordan's just joining us. We're closing the door.
This is Louis Jordan. I'm the Executive Director here at the Housing Authority. And we want to talk to you about the collaboration that we built in developing a school attendance program. And so just as we built the program in a collaborative effort, all of us will have a chance to speak one way or another as we flip through our slides. So by way of background, Marin City is the home of the only family housing development we have in the agency. We manage 500 units across the agency, of which 300 are located in Marin City, in the Sausalito School District, Marin City Sausalito School District. So with that being said, we probably have as much of a neighborhood school as any would imagine. Currently, 86% of the children that attend our local school, which is Bayside Martin Luther King Jr. Academy, 86% of those students live in public housing. This is the process of addressing attendance, as it is an issue in our community as with others, going back maybe 2.5 years ago when I became the executive director. The local school personnel, the principal, a school board member, and actually the school superintendent approached me in St. Louis with this number of kids that are in our program. Okay, we're having some technical difficulties. We're on slide 2. Can we advance to slide 2? There we go. All right. So again, 86% of the kids that live in public housing, that attend the school, live in public housing. School reached out to me as the new executive director, talking about issues around tardies and attendance. As I mentioned earlier, we're a neighborhood school. The school is probably 4 blocks at most from the development. And so we started to look at how we can develop a strategy to address the tardies and absenteeism. Now that being said, at that point, a portion of the school was located in the community. I think it was the middle school portion, if I'm not mistaken. Since then, the K through 5 has also been relocated or put into the community. So now we have a K through 12. Pardon? K through 8. Thank you. K through 8 that's in the community. And so once all of the kids moved over, we even saw a greater increase of tardiness and absenteeism. And what we could surmise is that under the old model, when the K through 5 were being bused to literally across the freeway, we thought, parents were more apt to make sure kids got on the bus and got out. Now that it's truly a neighborhood school, K through 8, we started to see some of the issues around chronic absenteeism and tardiness. We also saw a high incidence of student behavioral crisis, pointing to problems at home and overflowing into the school. So as we looked at the strategy, we knew that it just couldn't be a one-pronged approach, how we get kids to school. We also wanted to identify what are some of the obstacles to getting kids there as it relates to behaviors at home. Next slide. So as we identified the problem, we saw a solution. The Marin Housing Authority and the school district, we held community meetings. And in those community meetings, we came up with an idea of creating an attendance policy. We had created, and our board adopted this policy, the local school district adopted the policy, and it really has 3 main focus. We want perfect and or improved attendance. In my mind, the second point is probably the most relevant and what really makes this most unique. We want to identify issues and barriers that parents have to getting their kids to school. Trying to abandon that old notion of, parents need to care more and things of that nature. I mean, by virtue of having kids, we strongly feel that parents are invested in their children. The big question is, how do we get them to be more invested? How do we get them to understand, the long-term consequences of kids not attending school and not attending school on time? And what are the resources we can provide for those parents? And this is really where the community process comes into place. Because as most, if not all of you on the conference call for the webinar, we do housing, and we do housing well. We don't do analyzing people and making medical prognoses and things of that nature. That's why it was so critical for us to bring the community together and identify resources that we can direct our families, our parents, and sometimes our children. Direct those individuals to resources that can support them. And then the last prong, if you will, of the policy really speaks to rewarding behavior that we want to see repeated. So thus far, what we've done in that case is the staff and I, our commissioner, other people in the community, when school has attendance assemblies or disassemblies where, as a part of that process, attendance is recognized, we show up. Chief of police, superintendent, other folks in the community, we show up and we make a real big deal about the attendance portion. In addition to that, the Housing Authority has identified non-federal funds where we go out and we buy gift certificates and other incentives to recognize both children and families for the progress. I'm sure one of your questions would be, well, how do you get people to sign up and particularly to be a part of an information sharing process? That's been a challenge for us, although we decided to use incentives to do that. So, for example, we'll do things like we'll have raffles. Every 25 names that goes into a box, if your name is full, you can win an iPad. But in order to get your name in the raffle box, you have to sign up to allow the school to share information with the Housing Authority as it relates to attendance issues. And when I say the Housing Authority, a very small group, because your property manager has nothing to do with whether your child goes to school or not. So the sharing of that information is a small group of just a few of us that uses that information to go out and identify additional resources that could be available to increase and improve attendance.
Can you let us know how we can forward the slides?
Yeah. Next slide. Okay. So some of our school partners want to jump in and talk about this one.
Okay. So I'm Janet Newton, I'm the school principal. And one of the, as we began our partnership, we began to participate and make sure that each of our organizations are in the house, as Lewis said, acknowledge students around their attendance and coming to school, and also we have we participate together in back to school rallies. And other branches of the community and organizations in the community come out and supply, add resources and really help us to generate a real focus on returning to school, back to school time, what type of supplies are needed. So we have kids and families all out, and it's like a community fair that focuses on back to school. We also, during our assemblies, our reward assemblies throughout the year, our graduation, we always acknowledge students' attendance, and we continue to focus on attendance individually at school, in individual classes. We also have a program called the an early intervention program that we have at the school, where we meet with parents and we invite Bernadette, who's a member of the Housing Authority, to come in and sit down, and also our community connectors who are parent liaisons and parent advocates to help come up with ideas, and we ask parents what kinds of things can we help with getting students to school on time. And so with those other agencies there, we, parents and the agencies are able to put their heads together to come up with ways of helping and supporting the families to open up and come up with ideas of how, what's blocking or what challenges are there that's in place that keep kids from getting to school on time.
And I wanted to add, that when I talked earlier about to the extent that the Housing Authority gets involved in receiving this information, Ms. Newton just succinctly spoke to what I was meaning. You know, again, there's a limited amount of eyes that are on this information. Although going to school is a part of our state law, there are no conversations around if your kid doesn't go to school, it's going to impact your lease and things of that nature. We want to work early and often to address these issues of tardies and chronic illness or chronic absences, because we know the impact that it has on long-term education.
One of the other things we've done is that we've become participants with the Million Father March, Phil Jackson out of Chicago, and having the fathers and the surrogate fathers the first day of school escort the children to school really makes a difference in their seeing that we really care and want to support them, and that we're excited about a new school year, and that we hope they too are excited.
And out of that Million Father March, the first day of school, we get quite a few mentors and develop mentorships based on our church group, our faith-based groups have come up with a fatherhood organization that supports our school throughout the year and supports school activities, and they come in and actually check up on certain kids and certain families. And so we're building, our goal for our school is to be a community school. And we're actually in the stages of building that, growing into that community school through this is one of those processes.
Okay. Next slide.
The one thing we didn't mention on the how we participate is that if after the start we're still having difficulty getting the child and the parent involved in improving the attendance, we then go to the Student Attendance Review Board, which is at the county level, where then we bring in other organizations, and the parent can now be getting into the area where they have to answer to probation or the district attorney's office, et cetera.
But us getting involved early in start, we're looking at decreasing the chances of families going to SAR.
Right.
And it also creates more opportunity for kids to be in class.
In a non-threatening way.
Right.
Because once you hit the SAR, the county level, then it becomes more of an adversarial experience. And we really do try to prevent that and offer interventions before that process has to occur. Okay.
Partnerships, as I mentioned earlier, this is a collaborative effort, working with our local school district, Marin, Sausalito, Marin City District, which is where Bayside MLK Academy resides, working with our probation department. Probation has taken on a truancy prevention initiative. And in doing so, they're asking themselves the question, we know that if truancy, continues to be a problem, we're going to have to spend money on the back end. What can we do on the front end to address those issues, and what kind of dollars can we put towards it? A couple of months ago, the Housing Authority, again, in collaboration with folks around the stable, we submitted a grant proposal to replicate this notion of a walking school bus that some of you may have in your community. We were successful in getting a grant for that walking school bus. We simply, at least our version of it, is to use parents in the community to organize other parents to engage kids in a process where they walk to school in the morning. Walk to school in the morning. We have a neighborhood school, so there's probably 3 to 4 different entryways into the school from the Public Housing Authority. And so we'll have these parents and their stations work with parents who live in those particular stations, if you will. Walk to school in the morning. There's some outreach that parents will do prior to the morning, via text tree or phone trees, really just to encourage parents to get more involved, particularly as we look at those grades of K through 5. As we do that, we've also, through another partnership, we set up an opportunity where, in the times where parents don't tend to get their kids up in time to meet the walking school bus, we have a community partner who provides a van. So if you can imagine 2 or 3 kids are absent, we call out to those families saying, where are your kids? Oh my God, I overslept. Have your kid ready in 5 minutes. The van's going to come by and pick them up, get them to school. So that's a process we're looking at. In addition, the parents who will coordinate this effort, and by the way, we will give those parents a stipend who are going to be coordinating these efforts. They'll also have the opportunity to go through some parent training or parent education classes, and we're hoping that as they go through it, they'll encourage other parents to go through it. And then for those parents whose children are chronically either late or absent, we're going to strongly suggest that they become a part of this educational process, so that, again, our long-term goal is to get kids in school, use education as a pathway out of poverty. And so those are the kinds of things that we're doing. Performing Stars of Marin is our partner that provides the backup via the van. Community Connections has a role, and I'm going to ask Michael Taft to kind of talk a little bit about the whole notion of the parent engagement process as it relates to training.
Yes, hi, Michael Taft. Yeah, well, we mentioned community school, and our school is located in a neighborhood that's really, the proximity of everything is relatively close in walking distance. So it is actually, in my opinion, an ideal place for to create the support for parents and community members that we need. And one of the ways that Facilitator Change is promoting parent support and education is a little non-traditional, because we're looking at more like a parenting roundtable to bring parents together so we can create the parent-to-parent network. Parents can learn how to support one another and bring issues to the table. As we know that when we're talking about truancy, absentees, many times is due to some mental health issues, possibly with the parents or even other family members, stress, depression, and some emotional stuff going on as well. So the goal is to provide a support group for parents where they can encourage one another.
Can we go to the next slide, please? And if you can let me know how to advance the slides on the system, then we can get through the rest of this a lot sooner.
Okay, sure. Go ahead, Cassie.
Sorry, yeah, this is Cassie. Abra and I can advance them for you, or if you want to just keep saying next slide, the arrows are at the top of your screen, but if you're having difficulty, we can do that. And we do just want to check in on time, as we do have another presenter coming up, so if you need our assistance with that.
We can wrap up.
Okay, so yeah, there aren't any arrows on our screen to advance the slides, but Ms. Newton's going to just go for goals.
So Louis talked about our project that grew out of our meetings last year and our coming together in our partnership is that walking school bus. And the goal, as you can see, for the walking school bus, it simply is to reduce student tardiness and reduce absenteeism in our schools, and increase, by reducing tardies or absenteeism, students will be available to get to school on time, where we have a healthy breakfast and lunch program, and in getting to school on time, more students can participate in our healthy breakfast. As a matter of fact, just a plug for our non-GMO organic breakfast and lunch program. So, and also this, our effort is to reduce the number of SARB or school-related meetings that we may have in regards to attendance and issues. So what we want to do is, this is an educational piece that we teach to parents as well. Even though tardiness, everyone knows that it is not an academic issue. It is a non-academic issue, but of course the attendance is an issue that impacts the academic performance of our students. If they're not there, they cannot be academically successful. So our objectives are, next slide, yes, thank you. Reduce, like I said, the unexcused absences, the excused absences. We're just wanting to look at 80% of our students who may need the attention of this process. We will reach 80% of our students in this process with the van and the walking school bus. Also, I'm going to skip down and say that we're also hoping that this will generate a parenting network, because it becomes a word-of-mouth, parent-to-parent connection, and with the parenting network, that too, we're hoping as a side effect, bring parents closer to the school, align us closely in school issues, and also bring them into the schools more. Did I miss anything?
I think you covered it more. Yeah, and again, I don't know if you mentioned the fact that having kids in school and in school early increases our attendance at early morning breakfast, which allows kids to have a healthy meal. So when we look at our strategies, recruit parents, and this is around the parental involvement piece. We want to recruit coordinators, implement the walking school bus, and provide incentives. The second strategy really allows an educational opportunity for the parent coordinators. We want to help to develop, through the work, through the training that Michael provides, build some future leadership there. Have them do things like take on the coordination of educational efforts. For whomever's on the call that, are doing these kind of things in your community, you know that our funding from a housing authority becomes less and less every year. And so we don't get those dollars we got in the past to do these things. So to the extent that we can expand our opportunities to work with others is critically important. And then the last strategy, again, I think we've kind of touched on that. The next slide really speaks to our overall process, if you will. We're trying to go from policy to program. These hardcore, this is what you have to do, this is why you have to do it, going to a program that ultimately results in a different lifestyle, a greater commitment from parents and the community, a greater awareness from students on how important education is and how it, again, as I said before, can be our pathway out of poverty.
All right, changing the culture of the community is the goal.
Absolutely. And then last, we talked about the whys. I think we touched on that. You know, we need to not only change the culture, look at moving families out of poverty, but we also want to break cycles. You know, our charge is to provide safe, sanitary, and affordable housing for those who need it, not necessarily generations and generations of the same families who need it. So to the extent that we can help families move on to make room for other families so that we can dispatch our charge, we see education as an opportunity to do that. Depending on where you're listening from, the populations that you serve might be very similar to those that we serve. Very, very low-income individuals, and oftentimes, you know, individuals from the African-American, Hispanic, Asian, and immigrant community that, again, are just as capable as anyone else, just needs that additional help and support. And so you see our motto at the end. We are a community of scholars that model love, promotes learning, and elevates knowledge. Any questions at all?
Yeah, this is Kathy. I can help facilitate some of the questions. I see that some of our participants, thank you, have been putting questions in the group chat, which, Marin, I know you've answered via text, but just I think a consistent question that's coming from several individuals is the focus on the ACOP as far as what does it say and how do you have both information about the program or making sure that there's a focus on attendance, and also I see that there's no loss of housing by participating in the part of this program. So if you can speak to a little bit more of the process with the ACOP, I think that would be of interest to a lot of individuals on the call.
Sure. Bernadette will speak to that.
Yeah, so back when we first started these meetings with the local school, and our response was to develop a policy, and that policy was adopted by our Board of Supervisors in October of 2013. And then we incorporated it into our ACOP effective January 2014. And Chapter 18 of our ACOP basically addresses the school attendance pilot program policy and procedures, and it's outlined over about 5 pages, the purpose, the scope, the policy. You know, we did get some pushback from our community at first where, like the person in the comment asked, do they lose their housing? And it was never an issue that our interest in engaging our families and children to help them increase their attendance would ever affect or jeopardize their housing. The intent is to let them know that the Housing Authority understands the risks, the environment of the children and the parents, and to provide them with the wraparound services to respond to a need and a gap in services by brokering partnerships.
And that being said, when we initially brought this policy before the board, we looked at it as a requirement. As Bernadette mentioned, there was a lot of pushback, particularly from the legal community, and it was somewhat offensive, if I can say that, to suggest that because these families are poor and minority, we would have a undue burden on them asking parents to make sure their kids get to school. Rather than getting into a long legal spat, we reverted to a voluntary process. So the short answer is no, there's no conversation around, as it relates to the ACOP, people losing their housing. We're hoping over time the incentives, the spirit of being a community that values education will get more folks involved in that.
Great, thank you. And I think there are a couple sort of follow-ups as far as the actual program goes. We will have to start to transition to our next presenter, but as far as the incentives for participation, do parents receive additional support? I think you mentioned a stipend or any kind of incentive for participating?
Well, there's a couple things. So on the attendance piece, thus far we've given out gift certificates, and we're strategic in that we don't give the gift certificates to the kids at school. In fact, Commissioner Hall, who's here today, he and I, over the last few attendance assemblies, we've actually gone door to door. We go back to the authority, we knock on the door, we give the certificate recognizing the child for its attendance and the parent for its effort. And probably the most interesting thing about that process is the people who don't get gift certificates. As they say, why did he get it and I didn't? And as this one young man once said, because I never missed school. In addition, the walking school bus concept that we talked about, the parent coordinators will give stipends to. The total amount of money to receive from probation for this program is around $20,000. Housing Authority is going to put in another $4 or $5. So between stipends and incentives to those who increase attendance efforts is how we'll spend those dollars. So 99.9% of it will go to incenting the families and kids that are involved in the process.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for that great presentation and the great follow-up questions. I think there were a couple additional questions about the logistics of the ACOP. If that's maybe something that you would be interested or available or able to make available, I think that would be really helpful to other folks on the call. But unfortunately, we do have to switch over to our next presenter. But thank you so much for yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're
And next we have Attendance Works and Sue from Attendance Works to go ahead and give us their presentation as well.
Hi everyone, good morning or good afternoon depending on where you're joining us from. I just want to first acknowledge Marin County and all the incredible work you're doing. A lot of what I'm going to say in the next few minutes really mirrors the kinds of strategies and coordination and work you're all doing. So I just want to applaud you for your best practices and your show of love and building a culture of learning by really making attendance a priority in your community and supporting families when they're experiencing barriers rather than the punitive approach that folks have taken in the past. So I just really appreciate your incredible work. If you could flip to the next slide. So Attendance Works is a national organization working across the country in states and in communities, really helping to support this idea of how do we transition from a truancy and punitive focus to really understanding chronic absence. So as many as 7.5 million students are missing nearly a month of school every year by the end of the year. And it's 135 million days of lost instructional time, which, as the person from Marin County pointed out earlier, if the student's not in the seat, they can't learn. And that's just a ballpark estimate because we don't actually have data that tells us for sure how many kids are missing this much school. One of the things I wanted to point out is that mapping and looking at the data and really examining it is so incredibly important. And as you can see, when they took a closer look at chronic absence in San Francisco, for example, they found that their citywide rate of chronic absence was 9%, so about 1 out of 10 students missing a month or more of school each year. But then when they looked at the rate of chronic absenteeism in the public housing for the students that were housed, they found that the chronic absence rate was 50%. So creating it was both a crisis, but also an incredible opportunity to go directly to where the students, to partners that could help the schools and the school district really think about how do we partner together to support those families and those students. Next slide, please. So just a backdrop, just a reminder, a chronic absence is all types of absences. We're looking at when a young person misses school, perhaps because they're sick, and then the unexcused absence when maybe perhaps their older brother stays home or older sister stays home to take care of them. That's an unexcused absence, but that student is still out of school and missing instructional time. And then thirdly, suspensions. And we know that suspension can sometimes be a useful tool in helping to support change behavior, but we also know based on research that when we're really looking to change behavior, we have to look at other types of strategies and supports and understand the underlying reasons for why students are behaving in a certain way and helping to change the behavior based on the root cause rather than suspending and putting kids out of school. Next slide, please. So another point in this shift from truancy to chronic absence is truancy can really mask the number of students that are at risk for academic failure based on the number of days that they're missing, especially as you can see in this chart from San Francisco. When you look in the early grades, there's a tremendous number of students that are missing enough school to be off track academically, but if we only use the truancy flag and not the chronic absence flag, we're missing those students. And so this shift to chronic absence is an important shift, which we really want to understand which kids are missing too much school for any reason. Next slide. The other thing that's important to understand is that chronic absence adds up over time. Generally speaking, schools and districts are set up pretty well to notice when students are missing 3 or 4 days in a row. There's so many districts and schools that have the, you can push a button and print a report that tells you all the kids that missed 5 days in a row. This idea of sporadic absenteeism adding up over time and having serious impact on the students' academic learning is something that we understand more about now than, say, even 5 or 10 years ago. So we may not notice chronic absence because we don't have the system set up to track absenteeism over time and flag kids based on missing a couple of days a month. Next slide. So the relationship between attendance and achievement, next slide. So what we know is that chronic absence is especially challenging for low-income children, with poor children being 4 times more likely to be chronically absent in kindergarten and later grades than their high-income peers. And we know that families that lack resources have more challenges around some of the other issues that then create barriers to attendance. Next slide. We also, there's a lot of research out there about the relationship between absenteeism and academic outcomes, but in particular highlighting Rhode Island recently did an analysis looking at kindergarten absenteeism, and they found that compared to the kindergartners who regularly attended, there were long-term consequences, including the students who were absent in kindergarten scored 20% lower in reading and math in later grades, and the gap between the chronically absent students and their regularly attending peers only grows over time. They were twice as likely to be retained in a later grade, twice as likely to be suspended by the end of 7th grade, and they were also much more likely to continue to be chronically absent. So the early grade absenteeism is an indicator of later problems and is an opportunity to then intervene as soon as we see an issue with attendance and help to prevent some of these other issues that happen over time. Next slide. And in particular here you'll notice that chronic absenteeism for students living in poverty has a greater disproportionate impact on graduation rates as compared to students who are not eligible for lunch subsidies. And so the students on the left, represented in the bar chart, are students who were eligible for free and reduced meals. And you can see that the students who were at risk, they weren't actually missing 10% of their days on roll, but they were missing somewhere between 6 and 9% of their days on roll. So that middle brown bar, 73% of those students made it to graduation as compared to the at-risk population of students on the right-hand side, that brown bar, where 91% of those students who are not eligible for free and reduced meals made it to graduation. So even students who weren't chronically absent but still missing, a significant number of days, it dramatically decreased their graduation rates. And then for the students who were chronically absent, only 37% of those eligible for free and reduced meals made it to graduation as compared to 67% of their non-eligible peers. Next slide, please. So how can we address chronic absence, in particular thinking of you all and the possibilities, and a lot of what Marin County described I'm going to talk about. Next slide. One of the places we like to start is thinking about why students are chronically absent. So there's the fallacies or the misunderstanding. So absences are only a problem if they're unexcused. This is a particularly important point when communicating with families that you house. So parents generally think that if they're giving permission to their children, and this happens in younger grades, so if I say it's okay to stay home, if you're having trouble with a friend, or I know you're tired, maybe we stayed up late last night, I'll give my, little person permission, and therefore it's okay. But if my older student decided to not attend school without my permission, then as a parent I see that as a problem. And what we have to do is help our parents understand that all absences are a problem, and that we really should only be allowing our children to stay home if they are sick or due to a family emergency. And even doctor's appointments, we want to try and encourage our families to the extent possible to schedule them either not during school hours or at the very beginning of the day or the very end of the day, trying to make sure that kids miss as little school as possible. Also, this idea of sporadic versus consecutive, making sure folks understand that a couple of days a month actually can add up to quite a few days missed. Attendance only matters in the older grades. So, you know, they're young, they'll catch up, they're, you know, what's happening in the early grades, what they're learning is stuff that they can catch up on later. And what we actually know, and you all I'm sure understand, is that subjects are scaffolded, learning is scaffolded. If kids miss significant time in kindergarten and first grade, that actually seriously impacts their capacity to learn to read. And if they don't learn to read by third grade, it seriously impacts their capacity to participate in learning as they grow older. So we have to help parents understand that there is actually pretty significant and very serious learning happening in preschool and kindergarten, even if some of that learning looks like play. The barriers that you see listed in aversion, all of these things exist in any community at any given time and in any school. The trick to the secret sauce is understanding for your particular community what are the overriding issues that are most significantly affecting the students and the families that you house, and then what are the strategies that can help to address the issues that you're seeing in your community. Next slide, please. One thing I wanted to highlight here is that I think that Marin County really did a great job of showing this. So the shared accountability, the relationship between the school, the housing authority, and the local community partners all working together with a common agenda and a clearly determined set of goals that they had established is one example of shared accountability so for your community, really thinking about what is the goal that you want to achieve and who are the partners and how do you hold each other accountable through MOUs or through written agreements, but being clear about who's responsible for what and what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve. I also heard a housing authority once talk about capacity building from the perspective of working with the school that served certain schools obviously serve more of your youth than other schools. So helping those schools to understand some of the barriers and significant issues that the families and students that you house may be experiencing and working with the schools to develop their capacity to serve the families that you house is an opportunity for capacity building. Positive messaging, and also not just positive, but also being really clear with families about how absences add up over time. So it's both about attendance being important, which most people acknowledge and understand, but going deeper to say, what is good attendance, what is regular attendance, which is missing 9 or fewer days in a school year, excellent attendance being missing 5 or fewer days in a year, and how anything beyond that can really put their child at academic risk. Next slide, please. We also like to support this idea of a tiered intervention strategy, so putting in place universal strategies that are for all families and youth, and then adding on to that specific strategies that are related to the students and families that are missing, that are at risk for missing too much school, and thinking about your work in that tiered intervention model. And then I heard the folks on the call from Marin County talk about that tier 3, which was the SARB, which is the more intensive case management as an example of a tier 3 strategy. Next slide, please. So one thing around communication and education, AttendanceWorks has a ton of resources on its website. In particular, in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see Bringing Attendance Home. That's our parent engagement toolkit that is accessible for free. You can download it and pull ideas off of there. But the point here with the research from Todd Rogers is that the vast majority of parents believe that their child's attendance is fine, even if their child is chronically absent. So we don't know what we don't know. And so until there's an intentional effort to educate and help to reinforce the messages around absences add up, parents generally believe their child's attendance is fine even if it's not fine. Next slide, please. And then we also have tools for Tier 2, for the kids who are at risk for chronic absence. Next slide, please. It's called The Power of Positive Connections because, as the gentleman said earlier, this really is about supporting families, understanding problems, and solving them. Here's a chart that really helps you to think about who are those kids that need to be flagged. Any student that was chronically absent in the prior year, the risk for chronic absence is more than 50% that they'll repeat chronic absence without an intervention, or using same-year data, looking at attendance over the month. If a student is missing 2 or more days a month per month, that student is tracking towards chronic absence by the end of the year. Next slide. Some of the strategies that we have in place are this student attendance success plan. It can be used in Tier 1 or Tier 2, so you could use it with, say, all of your families who have incoming kindergartners, and helping them to think through strategies they can put in place at home to support regular attendance. It also helps families to determine who their help bank is, who are their friends and family that can help to support them, either with getting their kids to school or with helping them resolve issues that may come up that prevent them from getting their kids to school. It can also just be used as a Tier 2 strategy where you pull it out when you have a kid who's at risk for chronic absence and helping to work with their families to think through what they can do at home to help resolve the issue. Next slide. And then some of the interventions, and I heard Marin County talk about a couple of these, using attendance buddies and mentorships. Walk to School Companion or the Walk to School Bus are some examples of Tier 2 interventions that are designed to meet the needs of students and families. Next slide. And then what housing authorities can do, we've talked a lot about that, but just to get a little bit more specific, next slide. One of the things you can do is map your data. Early chronic absence is often concentrated in certain neighborhoods and schools, whereas in high concentrated areas you'll see much higher, less mappable data for older use. But for elementary use, it's generally, it is more isolated. So looking at particular schools and particular neighborhoods. Next slide. And when Hope San Francisco did an analysis, they were able to identify that while many schools serve their kids, 8 schools in particular serve the majority of their kids. And so they were able to then focus on those schools, next slide, and put into place a series of interventions and supports in partnership with the schools that house their kids. So participating on the attendance team as an example, being part of parent conferences, and enlisting support of relevant community partners. Next slide. And then finally, you're going to see my very text-heavy slide, but there's a brief that we put together, a case study that has this information and more for housing authorities to consider when developing your own strategies that I know that Cassie and Abra are going to make available to you after this, but in particular conveying the importance of daily attendance, helping families get their children to school, maintaining housing stability during the year, partnering with the schools, engaging community-based services, and then ensuring that the families you house are connected to health and mental health supports, and finally, helping to minimize asthma triggers, as we know that youth miss about 5 million days a year lost instructional time due to asthma-related barriers to attendance. And with that, I will stop if there's any questions. I know it was quick, but I hope that I was able to give you some good ideas and at least a place to start.
Great, thank you so much. And as you mentioned, just feel free to go ahead and put any final or follow-up questions in the public chat or the Q&A. But thank you so much for providing just a really great comprehensive overview of a variety of strategies and materials available to all of us for free. That's very awesome to be able to extend this work forward. Any other final questions? Also, as Abra mentioned, these slides will be available. They are available on the Google Drive, and she'll be sending up follow-up directions and a follow-up email. Also, this is our last scheduled webinar of topics for our webinars, so there'll also be information in your email about our next set of topics for future meetings. Any other final?
Can I just one more quick thing on the student attendance success plan. In addition to the strategies in the Family Help Bank, it also comes with a calendar. So it helps families to track attendance over time so that they can start to notice if their kids misses too much school. So that's such a great, easy sort of first step, I think, to download that and make that available to families and really help families fill that out and think about their own child's attendance. So I just wanted to point out that I had the calendar as well.
The link is on Attendance Works probably, or
Great, thank you so much. I'm not seeing any other final questions. So, Abra?
Yeah. So thank you so much again. Just want to echo what Cassie said. Both Marin Housing Authority and all of the wonderful staff from the school district who came and spoke, and Sue from Attendance Works. I think this is obviously a topic that is really important to all of you that were on the call, and lots of other people who weren't able to join today, so this is great information. If you do think of something after the fact that you want to ask of either of the presenters, please just send me an email and I will get you connected. And like we said, this was recorded, so I will, in a couple of days when that recording is available, I'll load it up to the Google Drive and I'll send out an email with directions on how to access it. You'll be able to get that along with the slides from the presentation. I'm seeing just one last question, so we'll go ahead and answer that before we officially close out. So I don't know if this would be best for Marin Housing Authority, if you all are still available to answer this, about furthering fair housing and how that might be affected, how the neighborhood school might be affected by that.
Well, I'm not clear on the question. I mean, we have equal opportunity housing, so, and Lewis stepped out, so I'm not real clear on the question with fair housing.
I would suggest that perhaps what we're going to start seeing is more less concentrated public housing through the Fair Housing Act and more dispersed families that are eligible for housing supports being so less concentration around that. So I think that what that means then is perhaps thinking through more strategically the partnerships both with the schools, that you'll still have schools that are going to disproportionately serve your kids. So still understanding which schools disproportionately serve the kids that you house. But also I think that that means thinking through the relationship with the school district and how you can build in strategies and supports for the families you house through partnerships with the school district. So I think it's going to take more creativity and more agency relationships, but I do think that it opens up the opportunity to think more strategically at a systems level around the support.
Yeah, but I still think you have to look at the fact that you would have to do a disaggregation of the data, because even though the kids are dispersed, when you disaggregate, those students who are poor and of color are usually still having difficulties in the education realm.
Absolutely. And so the early warning system of using attendance and behavior data and academic data to understand who the kids are that are most affected and most at risk, and making sure that the resources and services are being strategically aligned to help those students and families.
Yes, and in regard to fair housing and changes in maybe development, such as, large public housing developments to scattered site, Marin Housing Authority at Golden Gate Village in Marin City has only one development, and it's 300 units that house about 800 people. So it's sort of contained on 33 acres, and the possibility of it becoming scattered site isn't likely for our jurisdiction. But I kind of see what you're saying in terms of changes in housing development for larger places such as San Francisco or Oakland, where they would look at different strategies and planning for interventions.
This is Lewis, and unfortunately I had to step out for a moment, but I'm back. Just to reiterate the point that Bernadette just made, while we only have one public housing family development, there's we manage and maintain 2,100 Section 8 vouchers. And since I've been in this business, my biggest concern around the people we serve has been our Section 8 population, because they're out in communities, and more times than not, if we don't get information from the community about some behavior that isn't positive, we don't hear much about them. So over time, I'm hoping that we can move this process to a place where we can support the families, the school-age children that are in our Section 8 program.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, and we know that the geographic makeup of the folks on this call and the class of membership more broadly definitely does have some differences. But again, there's a lot of really fantastic and creative work happening at the Marin Housing Authority in this area, and I know also for others of you on the call as well. So we really are very excited to see what innovations we can continue to create in the future. And if you have further follow-up questions, please connect with me via email, and we'll get those answered for you. Thank you to all our presenters.
Thank you.